let's get started and commence with our conversation this evening. My name is Ryder Todd Smith. I'm a consultant with the City of Hercules. My role tonight is to help facilitate this conversation, field questions from the audience via the Zoom question feature, and keep our panel moving along to respect your time this evening. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Victoria by the Bay Landscaping and Lighting Assessment District. And our conversation tonight will last about an hour and a half as our wrap-up time. We got some hard stops in the back end with some of our panel members who need to get rolling. But that's our plan for this evening. Let's go to the next slide. So just a quick note up front that this meeting is being recorded. We're recording this meeting for primary reasons is that we want to be transparent and communicative with the public. And so we're recording this session because there's going to be a lot of information conveyed and you may miss out on a particular note, and we want to make sure you have a chance to go back and hear it again. So we're going to record this, and then within relatively short order, we'll be posting it on the city's various video hosting platforms, and then making it available on the victoriallad.org website, where you'll be able to come back and rewatch this. So if you're really excited about lighting and landscaping, it'll be a great opportunity to learn even more about this. So just know that we're being recorded this evening. We'll go to the next slide, please. With that, we're joined by a great number of experts on a panel conversation tonight. It takes a lot of different experts to help address the complications of landscaping and lighting districts. So I'm going to ask them each to just briefly introduce their role that they play relative to this subject. I'm going to start down this list. Dante, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, I'm Dante Hall, and I'm the city manager here in Hercules.
All right. And so, Dante, your primary role is to be the CEO of the city at large, and this district is one of several entities the city manages for districts in the city, correct?
Correct.
All right. Mike, what do you do for the city?
As the Public Works Director, I directly oversee the lighting and landscaping assessment districts.
Okay. In addition to having broader responsibilities for all the infrastructure throughout the city, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. And then Ed?
Good evening. My name is Ed Espinoza. I'm a consultant for the city and serve as their assessment engineer, assisting with the annual administration of the landscaping and lighting assessment district.
So you're kind of a hardcore assessment district nerd. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair assessment, Ryder. Yes, thank you.
All right, excellent. Jeff.
My name is Jeff Brown. I'm the Public Works Superintendent for the City of Hercules, and working directly under Mike, I administer the field aspects of the lighting and landscaping district and all the other public works infrastructure of the city.
All right, so you're out there watching stuff happen, making sure it's working okay.
That's right.
Excellent. Ben. And no conversation is complete without an attorney.
Hi, I'm Ben Fay, and I'm an attorney who provides legal advice to the city on this landscaping and lighting district, in particular constitutional questions on what loopholes and legal requirements have to be met in order to do this.
Excellent. All right, thank you, sir. And then last but not least, we have JR and his partner Roman tonight. What do you guys do?
Hi, yes, I'm JR. I'm a Pacific Site Management Division Manager. And to my right here is my colleague, Roman Guzman, who is my
account manager for Pacific Site Management.
Yeah. Okay. And Pacific Site, you guys are the contracted landscape provider working and servicing the Victoria Gardens area?
Correct.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we got an amalgamation of talent on this call. I appreciate you all being here. Let's go to the next slide. Mia. Oh, sorry, you went. I'm looking at the wrong slide. Thank you. All right. I think real quick, Dante, I want to throw it over to you to talk about today's agenda and to welcome the audience.
Sure. Thank you, Ryder. I'd like to start off by just thanking the community members for joining us this evening. I view this as a conversation where we can all learn about lighting and landscaping districts, specifically Victoria by the Bay Lighting Landscaping District and the Prop 218 process. Now, it's a very complicated process that has a lot of moving parts, and we know you have a lot of questions. We want to hear those. Those are incredibly valuable to us. We've assembled a team here of panel experts to answer your questions. Again, I just want to thank people for being here tonight.
Awesome. All right. And I'm going to throw it back to you shortly as well. But just a reminder, if you go to the next slide real quick, Mia, as Dante noted, we're going to have a presentation that's going to last for about 35 minutes or so. We're going to get a bunch of information out there to empower you with knowledge. And then we have this at the bottom of your screen, you should see this Q&A feature. And what you can do is if you have questions that come up anytime during the presentation, just go ahead and click that button, go in and submit a question to us, and we'll route it through our system to address that question. So that's why this is part of us being, we can't anticipate every question possible. So it's important for you to ask your questions. And if we aren't clear about something, to seek clarity. I will also just note that prior to tonight, we had the ability for people to submit questions ahead of time. We had a number of questions that were submitted. So even if you submit a question tonight, we're going to get to it. We're just going to get to some of those initial questions that were submitted first before we get a chance to get to some of the questions that might be submitted tonight. All right, so that's the Q&A feature. And if we go to the next slide, I think it takes us back to a discussion about council's mission statement. So if you want to take it from there, Dante, and remind us about the context of the city's role in all this, and I will hand it over to you, and then you can handle it through the rest of our panel members as we go along.
Great, thanks, Ryder. So our city council's mission statement is to lead a diverse community and enhance the quality of life of residents of Hercules. And we do this by providing effective, efficient, responsive, and innovative services with integrity and culture and a culture of transparency. So that's the lens that we view all of the initiatives, is to be transparent, to be authentic with the residents of Hercules in everything that we do. And then the next slide. We're going to learn a little bit more about this, but at the very foundational level, what is a lighting and landscaping district? Of course, some of you know that they provide for the maintenance of our city street lights, our parks, our roadways, and landscaping and open spaces. And there are three primary types of services provided by LLADs through the annual assessments paid by property owners. Those are street lights, landscaping, and upkeep of park amenities. As you know, well-maintained landscaping, lighting, and parks keep our neighborhoods attractive and safe, and they also add to our property value. So they're very important to the fabric of the city and the community of Hercules. So with that, I think I'm going to toss it to Mike to handle the next slide.
Thank you, Dante. So Victoria by the Bay is actually one of 5 lighting and landscaping assessment districts in the city of Hercules. Encompasses the entire city limits. Virtually all 8,000 parcels in the city belong to one of these districts. And Victoria by the Bay encompasses about 800 homes. And as you can see from this next slide, the district boundaries, perhaps the best way to begin to describe the boundaries is what they don't include. So you see San Pablo Avenue down this, so that entire right away, all the landscaping actually is not part of Victoria by the Bay. That's part of the Major Roads program. And then all the way to the left of your screen where Shoreline Park is, so this is the restrooms, the play area, the swing set, the picnic tables, as well as the large grassy area, are actually part of what's called citywide parks. It's completely separate for Victoria by the Bay. Victoria by the Bay doesn't fund either of those two areas. However, it does fund what I will call first the collector roads. So that's Victoria Crescent West, Victoria Crescent East, and Craftsman. And you can see those by the thicker lines on the diagram. There'll be, incidentally, more information on this on coming slides, but for those collector roads, all of the landscape improvements in the street right-of-way, that's from fence to fence, is maintained by the district. Also maintains the street lights, which you can see by the yellow circles, as well as residential streets, which are the non-collector streets. And there it's just the planter strip area between the curb and gutter and sidewalk, and then 2 parks, Victoria Park and Arbor Park. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go into some detail about the amenities in the district. So this is where the assessments go to in terms of funding. So the first is that there's 245 streetlights total, and they're energy efficient LEDs. As you can see, they're decorative in nature. So they're a post top type light with an acorn light on top. And if you look immediately to the left, you can see a similar pole there posted no parking. Also, mailbox posts and street sign posts are similar. So they all work together to synergize to anchor the landscape architecture out on site, create a focal point for people, and overall improve the experience and the aesthetics in the district. With regards to the LED portion, so LED is an improved energy efficient measure. Basically, the lights there are relatively maintenance free and they have a long operational life. They used to be high pressure sodium, but were converted by the city about 15 years ago. So there's some savings with those. But with regards to the streetlights in general, so adequately lit streetlights do maintain safe neighborhoods and improve the appearance of property frontage at night. Street lighting also keeps our streets safe for drivers and pedestrians alike, as at night or in bad weather, drivers and pedestrians can better see one another, traffic signs, and bicyclists. Next slide, please. So here are some photos of the collector streets where the entire corridor is maintained. This is actually Craftsman Street looking towards San Pablo Avenue. If you look at the top photo, what's maintained by the district is everything from the curb and gutter. You see the 6-foot planter strip with grass, with trees. Farther to the right, you see ground cover and then tiered shrubs going all the way to the wall. So the district pays for all of this along the collector streets. Next slide, please. Now on residential streets, the district maintains the planter strip between the sidewalk and curb. This is approximately in front of 800 homes. So the turf there is very durable. Obviously, it's attractive, lush, green, but it's also, as you'll hear later, very thirsty. And within these planter strips are approximately 4,950 trees. It's quite a number of trees. So they provide shade and cool, especially in summer, which helps with folks' electric bills. And then many of them are deciduous, meaning they lose their leaves in winter. So when there's less daylight out, they let more light in. Obviously, they're very attractive as well. Next slide, please. So now on to the two parks. So Arbor Park basically bisects Victoria by the Bay, and it starts at the intersection of Trellis Bay, South Arbor Bay, and then heads towards the bay, looking at the photo at the bottom left. So it starts with the gazebo there, and then it meanders forward to the pathway and the courtyard where you see the brick and bench through very attractive landscaping. Here there's roses and maple, and then ends at the pergola atop the staircase, looking down at the obelisk monument. Certainly on a clear day, you can see out to the San Pablo Bay and then into Marin. Extremely attractive. And in fact, if memory serves me correctly, this is actually where Miss Hercules' coronation was shot in 2020. It's on YouTube if you're interested. Great drone shots. Next slide, please. So the second park is Victoria Park, which splits Victoria Park Drive. It's 750 feet long, starts at Victoria Crescent West, and then goes to Shoreline Park. Includes trees, grass, shrubs, walkways, benches, and enclosed areas. In my opinion, very attractive. So at this point, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Ed.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to go over the current levels of service and funding shortfall. As the city's public works director just described, the amenities funded by the Victoria by the Bay LAD are quite extensive, and maintenance costs have continued to rise significantly since the assessment was established in 2002. Next slide, please. The annual assessment is authorized to increase by the change in the published Consumer Price Index, otherwise known as the CPI. However, the CPI has not kept up with the increases in maintenance costs and additional maintenance requirements, which we'll get into a little further in a moment. But this imbalance has resulted in the funding shortfall that you see before you on this chart, which presents the current fiscal year 23-24 picture. As you can see, the city is anticipating approximately $630,000 in maintenance costs as compared to $520,000 in revenue, which equates to a projected operating deficit of approximately $110,000 a year, or for this upcoming year. Next slide, please. So what are the main drivers of these increasing costs? First, the ongoing maintenance requirements in the district have evolved and become more costly over time. For example, neighborhood trees have to be trimmed more often and have grown to a size where a tree trimming company using a basket truck must be used. Also, periodic root and tree removals are necessary to minimize safety hazards, sidewalks breaking and tree branches coming down and things of that nature. So all this has added cost to the operations and maintenance, which obviously impacts the budget on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. Environmental changes also are a big factor. More extreme weather has impacted maintenance needs and landscaping practices, particularly the need for additional irrigation during drought years. Next slide, please. And third, the cost of utilities. The cost of utilities has significantly outpaced the allowable increases in the assessment revenue. As an example, the city's water provider, the East Bay Municipal Water District, has doubled their rates over the last 10 years as compared to a 39% cumulative increase in assessment revenue. So that's about a 60% difference over the last 10 years, which is very, very substantial, given that a good amount, I believe about a third of the Victoria by the Bay LAD budget is water. Also, the cost of electricity has increased significantly, but the city has been able to offset these increases by installing LED lamps on streetlights. So that cost has been managed pretty well. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to present why all of this is so important and it matters to your neighborhood and your community.
Next slide, please. The Victoria by the Bay Lighting Landscaping District, it has a large amount of landscaping in it, obviously, that everybody's been talking about, majority of which is turf and trees. The turf and trees require regular maintenance and consistent irrigation, fertilization, and regular mowing to for the turf to keep it up and healthy. The trees have also gotten to the point where, as Ed mentioned, their large size now is outside of our landscaping contract, which requires a separate contractor to be brought in on bid to prune them, and also more maintenance by our current landscaping contractor, just cleaning up the leaf droppage, which we go through every year, as the majority of the trees within the district are deciduous trees, rather they lose their leaves. Next slide, please. Sorry. As much of the issues as to the issue of making landscaping changes there, people have brought up the fact of, could we remove a lot of the turf and go to something more drought tolerant? Some of the issues are that turf is really hardy. It does take a lot of water and some maintenance to keep it going, but it also puts up with people walking on it, kids playing on it, people walking their dogs on it, and all of these natures. Whereas a lot of the other issues that we've tried other things in other neighborhoods with shrubs and stuff like that, and it doesn't hold up as well. So that's one of the main reasons. And then the other is, if you look into the cost of what it would cost to remove the turf, design new things, change irrigation, all turf, it would just add to the cost issues. Next slide, please. And the big thing is, as Mike, the Public Works Director, mentioned earlier, Victoria by the Bay has very mature landscaping in it now. The trees and the turf provide for a very lush and appealing look to the entire neighborhood, which keeps the property values going and really makes it a much more attractive neighborhood. So with that, I'll turn this back over to Ed for some possible solutions.
Thanks, Jeff. So given how important this matter is to the Victoria by the Bay property owners and residents, the city is taking this very seriously and is committed to continuous improvement and providing the very best LAD program possible to the residents of Hercules. So every effort is being taken to ensure the program is run as efficiently and effectively as possible. For this reason, the city has recently commissioned an independent third party to perform an analysis of services and cost effectiveness. The third party is expected to provide their findings to the city in early October, and city staff will digest their findings and implement recommendations as needed. Also, the city has hired our firm, my firm, Francisco & Associates, to evaluate potential increases in the LAD assessments to eliminate the current funding shortfall. Next slide, please. In the coming weeks, the city will be exploring all available options to increase funding to provide a high level of maintenance and safeguard property values, including the possibility of increasing assessments. Any proposed increase to the assessments will be communicated to property owners in Victoria by the Bay in a transparent manner. The city anticipates making a determination in the coming month or so, and we'll keep you updated as updates occur. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Ben, who's going to walk you through the requirements and what it takes to increase assessments, LAD assessment.
Thank you, Ed. So Proposition 218, which is part of the California Constitution, requires that for an assessment to be increased, the increase has to be approved by a weighted majority of the owners of the properties that would be assessed. So how exactly is that done? Could you move to the next slide? So the way it would work is each property owner in the assessment district would be mailed a notice of the proposed new assessment. And this notice will tell each property owner how much their property is proposed to be assessed, the amount of the assessment, and the reason and basis for the assessment. Importantly, it would also provide notice to the property owners of a city council meeting that has to be at least 45 days after the notice, at which this council will consider the proposed assessment. Also, this notice has to include a ballot. And to be counted, the ballot has to be returned before the close of the public testimony at this council meeting. Each ballot, as I mentioned, will be weighted by the amount of the proposed assessment. Of course, on these ballots, you can vote yes in favor or no, you're against it. And what the weighting means is, for example, just to pick numbers, if a proposed assessment for one property is $200 and for another property it's $100, the one that would be assessed $200, that vote would be worth twice that of the other one. So there's a direct relationship between how much you'd be paying in the assessment and your vote. And then following at this meeting, the votes will be counted. And actually the counting can continue to later dates if necessary. And if there's a majority opposition of these weighted votes, then the assessment cannot be imposed. If there's not a majority opposition, it can be imposed. And the first time you would actually see the new assessment would be the first installment of your December 2024 property taxes, because there's a lag before it can get put on the property taxes. So that's the summary of the constitutional requirements. I think now it goes back to Ryder.
Thank you, Ben. Always good to have an attorney present to explain some of the more complicated issues. I'll I'll actually kind of throw, we're entering the Q&A phase. So now this is where we're going to take questions. Remember, again, we had some pre-submitted questions. So we're going to work through some of those pre-submitted questions. And then I've seen some questions coming in during the presentation tonight, which is phenomenal. So I really appreciate the public's participation this evening to give us these questions and give us a chance to answer them. I also see a couple, what I would deem more comments than questions necessarily. And we're going to have a whole methodology for offering some additional comments as well as we go through this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A session. And I have a first question here that was pre-submitted. And the question is, how did this landscape and lighting assessment district end up going into a deficit situation in the first place, right? Like we now find ourselves in the deficit as opposed to anticipating it. So Mike, you want to start us off as a public works director on that one?
Sure. Thank you, Ryder. So as has been mentioned tonight, the deficit's due to three factors primarily. The first is just the cost of the irrigation water that's being provided by East Bay Municipal Utility District. East Bay Mud has doubled their rates effectively in the past 10 years. And then that's been coupled with a need for increased irrigation water. And this is because we're experiencing more extreme weather, specifically hotter weather during the watering season. And then the third factor is just, as was mentioned, the cost of trimming trees, which now they've reached a height, where they need a tree trimming contractor and a bucket truck. Those trees are approaching 20 years now. And then also, as was mentioned, they do tend to occasionally damage sidewalk. Their roots push the sidewalks up. That requires some repairs. So we calculate roughly increased water rates are about 125,000. The trimming of the trees is around 25,000. And then we do like to keep 25,000 on hand to mitigate any damage the trees may occur. So that's about $150,000 to $170,000 increase, which frankly more than covers the $110,000 deficit you're hearing about tonight.
Okay, so more water, more expensive water, more cost create deficit.
More trimming of trees.
Yeah, and trimming of trees. And fundamentally, I guess the one going back, there is a CPI adjustment in place, but to your point, the rate at which water rates have been going up has significantly exceeded I think Ed had commented on this, has significantly exceeded the CPI formula that's embedded in the assessment rate. Is that correct?
Yeah, like 60%. So if you go back a decade, I think the rates were about $400 per single family home. Now they're $600. Whereas the water rates have doubled, and also interestingly, houses have appreciated to twice the value they were a decade ago.
So I guess since you just raised that question, I guess just clarifying, the assessment rate, is it based upon a flat number that's then CPI indexed, or is it based on a percentage of the housing valuation?
So initially, it's based on a flat amount, which is then indexed to the CPI. Based on originally what people thought it would take to fully service the district. One can't help but think they didn't anticipate the cost of the trees once they matured, as well as, the climate change and increase in water costs. So those all coupled together are what are driving the operating deficit. And to my knowledge, this is the only, district has not received any increases above the CPI, which frankly is pretty unusual.
And I guess just one other clarifying point too, because oftentimes people don't look at their property tax bill, right? Especially if it gets just paid out of an escrow account, if they're with their mortgage. This is showing up on the property tax bill. Is that how the assessment is done?
Yeah, it's shown up, yes, on the property tax bill, paid twice a year, December and April.
Okay.
As a separate line item.
Okay. Another question that was asked here, are there other, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but are there other landscape and lighting assessment districts in Hercules that have had funding issues? And if so, how are those resolved? Ed, this isn't your first rodeo dealing with assessment districts, so why don't we throw that one to you?
Thanks, Ryder. That's a great question. Yes, other landscape and lighting assessment districts in the city have had funding shortfalls, whether it be due to maintenance costs exceeding assessment revenue or the need to replace improvements. It has happened. And so the city has resolved these funding issues by conducting Proposition 218 proceedings and obtaining property owner approval to increase assessments. Since 2017, the city has successfully approved assessment increases for 6 different neighborhoods located throughout the city to secure the funding needed to maintain and replace improvements for the long term.
And well, so let me ask then. So we're facing this deficit then, and I mean, obviously, other districts have addressed it with an assessment increase. Seems to be like one potential option, but I'm sure the public wants to know what other options exist. Mike or Dante, do you have some other options that exist for how we might address this deficit?
Sure, I'll take a first crack at it, see if Dante wants to follow. So, but as was mentioned, we are contracting with an independent third party, Baker Tilly, who's a management company, to do an audit basically of our operations. We want to make sure we're operating as efficiently and as effectively as possible. We're dedicated towards continuous improvement. We want to see if there's efficiencies that we can gain that will save cost to the residents. So that's the first option. The second has been mentioned is rates can be increased. This would be through the Proposition 218 process that was discussed. Services can be cut. That would typically be watering, maintenance, potentially streetlights, every other streetlight, something like that. Or maintenance responsibilities can be shifted to a private provider. So this would look like something, say the HOA taking over one of the parks or maintaining the planter strips. Those are the various options we're aware of that exist.
Okay. And Dante, have anything to add to that?
No, I don't have anything else to add to that, but there aren't many options, and Mike covered them well.
Okay. Ed, I want to drill back down with you on a question on this too. So, I mean, we're talking here, we had some context for assessment districts in Hercules, but first of all, how many assessment districts have you worked with over the course of your career?
Oh, wow. So our firm currently administers landscape and lighting assessment districts for over 50 public agencies throughout the state. I myself have either formed or currently administer close to 100, actually.
Okay.
And so yeah, this is what we do. Our firm specializes in the formation and administration of assessment districts.
So I guess looking beyond Hercules and just the bigger picture, how do these assessments stack up? What issues have you seen in other assessment districts? Is this a
Sure.
Hercules problem, or is this a broader issue?
Thanks for the good question, Ryder. So first of all, landscape and lighting assessment districts are a financing mechanism that is commonly used by cities and counties throughout the state to fund ongoing maintenance of landscaping, open space, parks, trails, street lighting. Since the passage of Proposition 218 in 1996, it's become fairly common for LADs in other jurisdictions to also experience these funding issues due to that limitation in the annual assessment revenues, because the assessment rates are established at district formation, and they can't be increased above that without property owner approval. So since the passage of Prop 218 in 96, due to that limitation in the assessment revenue that can be collected and the high maintenance cost increase over the years, particularly in utility costs, this is, unfortunately a fairly common issue. So for that reason, also obtaining property owner approval to increase assessments is also fairly common practice to avoid cutting maintenance services. So, as an example, in Contra Costa County, it's not uncommon for assessments, for LAD assessments, for neighborhoods with similar amenities and maintenance requirements as Victoria by the Bay, for the annual assessment to be $1,000 or more, the annual assessments, due to the maintenance needs and accumulation of capital reserves to replace to replace improvements.
Okay. So you've seen a lot out there, and and particularly in the East Bay as well, which has its own kind of unique economics and environment and things like that. And that's kind of informing your perspective on what you've seen other agencies have to face, or other least assessment districts have to face.
That's right.
Okay. Another question that was asked: who does all the maintenance work on the current landscaping, and who does the light maintenance? So, JR, we got you and Roman on. You guys are contracted with. Let's see. My understanding is you contract with the city, and then the city dispatches you out there to service that district. Is that correct? So, can you tell me, I guess, so what is it you guys are responsible for in the work that you do? And make sure you unmute yourself. I think you're muted right now, JR.
There we go. Yeah. So like I said, we're responsible for the day-to-day basis there. We have an irrigation tech dedicated to Victoria by the Bay. And we also have a crew. We do all the landscaping, turf, shrubs, up to the sound wall. And pretty much, anything that has to do with the landscaping that belongs to Victoria, it's pretty much, that's what we take care of. Except for some areas that are part of the HOA, but day-to-day basis is, we go in there, make sure everything is mowed, cut, clean. And of course, we try to conserve as much water usage, and try to implement the water efficiency, every year. So
okay. And I think I may have misspoke when I was asking the question, but you guys are not responsible for the lighting. The lighting maintenance is done by the city, Jeff. Is that correct?
I was gonna step in and ask and add, yeah, streetlight maintenance is done by the city, either by city staff, or if it gets beyond city staff, technical abilities, we do bring in contractors on an occasional basis. I noticed one of the questions that's been asked is, about the streetlights being updated and costs reduction from them being updated. The streetlights were updated, as Mike stated, to LED lights, which reduced maintenance on them drastically. One of the reasons we did the update was Victoria by the Bay had really, really high streetlight maintenance with the type of lights that were installed initially. And the LEDs resolved that. We do still occasionally have issues out there. The LEDs resolve a lot of the bulb replacement, but they do still have photocells that go out regularly. They also are fused, and fuses do, excuse the term, pop, go bad occasionally and need to be replaced. And so there is still a maintenance, but the upgrade to the LEDs reduced it drastically is almost a mild understatement.
Yeah. Well, I would just observe too, in the 100+ cities I've worked in, many of them have all done major LED upgrades. And, certainly there's energy savings, which have been substantial, but what's always been curious to me is the dramatic savings in labor costs too, because that light tends to last a long time as well, if it's a good high quality LED. So, yeah.
And if I can add too, part of the way the city was able to get the LEDs replaced when we did without major increases to the district was through a PG&E program that helped install them. So energy uses did drop dramatically, but there is a payment for the lights that is ongoing.
Right. And so that was kind of a financing mechanism of some sort, yes. Right? That PG&E.
Sorry, provided. Yeah, I may not have said it real clearly, but thank you, Ryder. Exactly.
All right. So since I got both you and JR unmuted, and we're going through some operational questions, a follow-up question. So, and JR, you kind of started talking about this a little bit, but can you reduce the watering or take other cost-saving measures to help address the deficit? So what more can we do to cut back on water usage? And I guess the trade-off there is, at some point, if we cut it back, either the turf goes brown or the trees starve. Like what's the technical term there?
Well, Mike and Jeff have been really helpful on this, and we've actually mature trees, shrub, we've actually cut back to 1 day, since they're, like we said, we're approaching the 20-year mark. So that's one thing that we've been doing last year, a couple of years. And we've been trying to shorten time We only water Monday through Friday. And you know,
And when you say water Monday through Friday, are you referring to the turf?
to the turf, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Only Monday through Friday, and nothing on the weekends. We usually try to have a window we water between 10 and 4 a.m. But we've been reducing time. So if you have seen a little more brown, it's because we're trying to, you know, conserve water. And we've been fortunate that the last couple of years been in a drought, but this year, I mean, we got a lot of water. So we were able to hold off on turning a lot of water on, which typically we turn it off in October, and we try to hold off until March. So there's a pretty good window where that's what we try to, you know, save as much water as possible. This year we were able to, I want to say, turn on water until maybe May. You know, so I'm looking forward to being more efficient. We use high quality sprinklers. We switch them out. You know, we're constantly trying to find ways to decrease costs and, you know, basically provide and be more efficient on the water usage.
So, and are there some, I guess, related to that then, some issues around watering planters or runoff or overspray that, Jeff, you have some observations on?
Yeah, I was going to say, if I can add in, right?
Please.
You know, mow strips, as everybody calls them, are one of the probably most difficult things to water accurately, would be a good word to use, because most of them are only 6 foot wide. Victoria by the Bay was built before a lot of the really super efficient sprinkler heads were on the market. As JR said, we have been, as things go bad, we've been trying to replace with better stuff that's a little bit more controllable. Also, Victoria by the Bay, as in a lot of Hercules, is, you know, it's, the name says it, Victoria by the Bay, it's on the bay, so you do get a lot of wind through there, which can you know, drive the water away from the turf. So there's those issues also. There's also the other issue in Victoria by the Bay that some people do see occasionally, and I don't have the exact count off the top of my head, and I doubt JR does either, but Victoria by the Bay has a very, very high number of irrigation controllers in it. And again, when the time it was built, they were not, you know, they're not internet based, they're not Wi-Fi based like a lot of the new systems are. So when JR talks about turning those systems off, which we do, that's one of the things that the City of Hercules does proactively throughout the city, not just in Victoria by the Bay. When the winter season gets here and we don't need the irrigation, we just flat turn the systems off. And then we try to hold them off we try to get them off as early as possible. And we try to bring them back online as late as possible so that the time of year they run is as minimal as possible. But that's something that, because of the type of timers and everything we have, it has to be done physically by hand.
Right.
So it does take a little bit of effort. And the same thing with, as JR mentioned about the adjustments, you know, it's clock by clock.
So partly what I'm hearing is just given when this infrastructure was put in the how many years ago was this infrastructure put in?
Going on 20 years.
Yeah. So we're essentially operating with 20-year-old controllers that don't reflect some of the latest and great. Like I've seen stuff from CalSense that will knock your socks off in terms of its dashboard display and your ability to like sit at home in your bathrobe and turn sprinkler heads on and off. Like, it's pretty fancy stuff.
Yeah, and there's two pieces to that statement. We do have irrigation timers go bad from time to time, and we do replace them with the best we can, would be the way to describe it. Because the one thing about, like you say, like, and we'll use Cal since you brought it up, if you want to go to a Wi-Fi type system or a cellular system, not only do you have to replace the clock, which can sometimes raise the cost of replacing the clock sometimes as much as 10 times, you've also got to make sure the backbone is there to run it. So there's that cost also that would have to be put in place. You know, a Wi-Fi or a cellular timer is no good if it's not talking to nobody.
Right. Well, I fear we may go down a rabbit hole of re-engineering an entire water system on this Q&A. But no, it's okay. I mean, I appreciate it. Trust me. Like, the point is, like, what I'm hearing you is you guys are trying to replace stuff with the latest and greatest as you can when you go through that system. Jeff, since you're still unmuted, let me do another related question that I think you would best be able to answer. But I'm sure some of the residents maybe they didn't even know they had an assessment district. They just thought they were in an HOA, and the HOA took care of everything. So kind of what does the HOA do relative to the lighting and the landscaping and lighting district? I mean, you can't really speak for the HOAs, but theoretically those HOAs fees go into other services. Like, how does that work out down there?
Well, we as a city don't see anything to do with the HOA fees. That's not a city function. So we see nothing to do with it. And Ben or Ed, correct me if I say this wrong, I'm going to do the best I can with it. Lighting and landscaping fees are not allowed to be used to maintain private property, period. It's pretty much that blunt and simple. So the lighting and landscaping district fees basically go to maintain the right-of-way and the park areas. And there is a very, very, very small amount of open space in Victoria by the Bay that is maintained by the lighting and landscaping district. The majority of the open space, a lot of people call them the slopes in Victoria by the Bay, are actually part of the HOA. And the map that was, if people really want to get a good look at it, the map that was in the PowerPoint presentation actually does show the HOA areas as opposed to the lighting and landscaping district areas. But like I say, the two really don't intermix at all.
Okay. Mia, while we're going through a couple of questions here, if you want to back up slides and get to that map again, the audience can check that out. I'm sure we'll make this, I mean, this PowerPoint deck itself is available if you want to download the PowerPoint deck. I'm pretty sure our team got it uploaded here and available for you to go download at victoriallad.org. It'll take you right to a web page on the city's website, and there's lots of information about this, including the PowerPoint deck for tonight, I believe. All right. Thank you for pulling that up, Mia. Let me go to another question that was submitted. So, Jeff, you're off the hook for a while. Congratulations. Now I'm going to throw a hard one at the attorney. Ben, if the assessment goes up, how does that process work? Who gets to vote? I guess that's another thing. This is not like your typical where you register to vote, so to speak. You got to have ownership rights, right?
Exactly. It's specifically, it's the property owners in the district who get to vote. They're the ones who are going to be charged. They're the ones who get to decide whether they want to be charged, whether they approve it. And this is governed by, I mentioned Proposition 218, we've thrown around a bit tonight, and it governs this whole process, and it has special procedures to make sure that everyone knows how and when to vote. That starts with notices that are sent to every property owner in the district, notifying them of saying, here's the proposed assessment amount, telling them that in 45 days or more, or at least 45 days away, there will be a city council meeting in which the proposed assessment will be considered. The notice also has to tell how the assessment is generally calculated and what does it do, what's it for. And included within that is a ballot, and that ballot everybody's encouraged to return by the meeting. And in the ballot, you can vote yes or no, for the assessment or against it. And after the public hearing, the ballots will be counted, and they're weighted, as I mentioned earlier, by the amount of the assessment. The more that you might be assessed, the more your vote counts. I mean, it's a direct relationship between how much this is going to cost and how much your vote counts here. The votes are counted, and if there's a majority against the assessment district, then it can't go forward. The new assessment cannot go forward. The old one can stay in place, but the new one cannot. And that's the end of it. On the other hand, if there is not majority protest, if there's a majority in favor of it, then the city council can approve the new assessments.
And to be clear, it's a majority of those that voted, not just a majority of the properties.
Correct. The majority of those who have voted, and then again, also weighted, as I mentioned.
And if you're, and by way of example, if you're renting a house, you don't get to vote. The vote is actually going with the person who owns the house that you're renting, for example.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
And the logic, I think, behind that is the property taxes where this is collected tend to go also with the owner. Right.
Yeah, it'll theoretically survive your lease because the owner will be stuck with it going forward, right? And they'll have that assessment that they have to contend with. Okay. So the fund is in a deficit. We saw some numbers on that. About it was $120,000 a year. I guess the kind of obvious question is, it's in deficit, but the bills are getting paid. I mean, JR is still feeding his family, and the contract is getting paid for them. Our staff is doing the work there. Who actually signs the contracts with vendors? Who writes the check? Who's paying the bills right now for the assessment district? I'm going to go straight to the top. Dante, what's the scoop? Who's in charge here?
Thanks, Ryder. And it's a good question. And the simple answer is, by default, it's the city's general fund that pays the bill. We've worked as a city over the last 6-7 years to dig ourselves out of a deficit, and we're headed in the right direction financially. And we just can't continue to cover a deficit through the general fund. General fund, just to give you an idea, it's the same fund that pays for stuff like police officers, pays for paving our roads, a lot of the things that we need. But if we have a deficit in other areas, those are the only funds that are available to pay for those bills. And so you can see why that immediately will be a problem that we need to address.
So I guess to put this in somewhat stark terms, fundamentally, somebody who doesn't live in this district, maybe lives on the opposite side of town, they're paying sales taxes. Those sales taxes go into a general fund, and those general fund dollars are currently subsidizing the operating deficit of this lighting and landscape district.
That's correct.
And I assume the theory behind the formation of lighting and landscape districts is the primary benefits of the lighting and landscape district are the people who live immediately around it and enjoy the nice sidewalk areas and the beautiful fields and the shrubberies and lights and things like that. So theoretically, they're trying to keep the costs centered back on the neighborhood that benefits most directly from those.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So bottom line, general fund is currently paying for those bills. The signing of contracts and whatnot is done by the city, signing contracts with, I assume you issue RFPs and pick best available vendors to service the areas and get some economies of scale, perhaps, in some of your contracting that you're doing and things like that. And that's all the finances are managed by the city for the district itself.
Correct.
All right. So I guess let's ask a hard question here too. So I'm going to go straight to the top again. So what if we just don't increase the rates, right? I mean, ultimately, the voters may vote, a majority of them may say, no, we don't want to, whatever this assessment is. Again, that's all being studied right now. So I'm not sure we're going to know what those numbers are going to be till October. But if we don't increase rates, what's going to happen? What are the options?
It really goes back to the question that was asked before. What options do we have? It's really to reduce services, to be able to afford what the district has. Now, we've had situations where a district has had some difficulties and needed a loan from the general fund, but that's something that the residents in that district are able to vote on. It's usually given a term, and that's added to the rate that pays back the general fund over time. To be honest, it's something that we really just cannot continue to carry through the general fund. Something has to happen, and that something has to either be a rate increase, a reduction of service, or something else. We've taken a look at efficiencies, and we invite the public to come to our workshop on October 3rd to kind of hear some of the things that our third-party consultant will deliver to the city council and to staff. There aren't a lot of options for curing the deficit.
Fair enough. And I guess to clarify point two, sometime in early October, where there's an anticipation that there'll be a study available for that workshop, or is that workshop happening? That workshop's happening on October 3rd, come heck or high water.
Yes, so the workshop on October 3rd will happen, and it's a discussion with our city council and the community. The question that was asked by council is, what can we do? Can we take a look at efficiency? Can we take a look at reducing services? How can we make our lighting and landscaping district sustainable? And so that's the question that we'll be responding to along with our consultant on October 3rd.
Excellent. Okay, great. It's no surprise the council is asking many of the same questions I'm kind of seeing come through tonight, which is these are all great questions to ask. And I'm sure you guys are working diligently to get those answers. And we're going to have some of them tonight as we work through this. So Mike, I got a question for you. So Veronica had asked via email, does funding for the district stay in the district, right? So if you're a resident near Arbor Park and you're paying your assessment fees, that money stays inside the district servicing the trees and the turf in that area?
Yeah, Ryder, thank you. That's a great question Veronica's asking. So funding for the district that's raised through assessments stays in the district. It's not moved to other districts or other areas. It all goes towards the lighting and landscaping in that district, with one exception, which is that every parcel in Hercules pays into what's called the Major Roads Fund. So that's San Pablo Avenue, Refugio Valley Road, Sycamore Avenue, John Muir Parkway. And the reason being is that everybody gets roughly the same benefit for the lighting and landscaping in these major roads. And so of the $603 that a single family home will pay in 23-24 in Victoria, $35 of that money goes to the Major Roads program, same as everyone else. Setting that aside, all the funding stays within the district.
Okay. Thank you for the precision of that answer, not just saying yes immediately. I guess a follow-up question that I would have too on that is, in let's say a great scenario, there's if an assessment district is paying in and they find efficiencies and they actually start having surpluses, I assume those surpluses accrue to the benefit of that district and will be available there to fix major issues that require major fixes or capital improvements or things like that, correct?
That's correct. So any surpluses would be put into a operational reserve, roughly equal to half the year's assessment, and then also into a capital reserve, which is based on the needs to do capital maintenance and capital replacement years out. So the money never again leaves the district. It's simply put in reserves to do things like fix parks, cut down trees, replant new trees, all these basic standard sorts of things.
Okay. Mike, a follow-up question for you that's related to some of this too. So Tulip had asked a question here about why has it taken 10 years to address this deficit? I guess my first question is, did it take 10 years to actually get to this deficit, or when did this deficit start manifesting?
If memory serves me correctly, the deficit began in 21-22.
Okay.
So approximately 3 years ago. And it's a bit tricky because as you're preparing for the coming year's assessments, you're spanning the current year where you've only got the financials for half a year. So you're not quite sure where you're going to come in on the watering. And then you're looking at the prior year to see what the trends are. So we needed to make sure that this trend was real and it was going to continue into the future. This is why it took 3 years to get to the point of where we're at.
So I guess I have an old adage, which is once is a fluke, two is a concern, and three becomes a trend. So now that we're in our third, it's now a trend.
Yeah, and you're operating on 6 months of financial data for the year you're in. So you want to be confident of the trend before you bring this issue up for the public.
Okay. A following question that Tulip had asked as well, and Ed, maybe I'll throw this one to you, but is the imposed assessment a one-time deal only, or is it an ongoing annual assessment?
So the LAT assessment is an ongoing annual assessment because maintenance needs to be provided every year, and the city needs the funding to provide the maintenance. With that being said, the proposed assessment, the city doesn't take assessment increases or proposing assessment increases lightly, right? And so the intent is to minimize the number of increases that are needed for the long term. And so when we are evaluating the proposed assessment and what that amount needs to be, we are looking at financial projections. We are looking at existing actual cost data. We're looking at capital needs, capital improvement projects, and things of that nature, because as best we can, we want to set the district up for success for as long as we can. With that being said, we also have to balance that, there is a dollar amount that no longer, or an increased amount that it may no longer be reasonable, if you will. So we're balancing all those things, but we're looking at a lot, when we're doing this evaluation of proposed assessments.
It's partly a financial engineering question, right? Of optimizing its infrastructure, projected maintenance costs, things like that, to try to get it right. I think foundationally, the quick answer to the question is no, this is not a one-time assessment. It'll be an ongoing assessment to sustain the operating as well as any capital improvements that'll be necessary out assessment district. Next question that was asked here, I think maybe Ed, you can handle this. And actually I was kind of, so how, I guess let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Can you tell me how much each homeowner pays for their assessment? So in other words, if I'm looking at this map, for example, you see single family residential homes are paying about 600. There's an apartment complex here. I assume they just have one big lump sum because there's only one property owner there. And then there's maybe some houses on the other side of the street that have different rates, or how does that work out right now?
So all single family homes within the boundaries of the district pay the current year's rates at $603 per year. And that's broken up into two installments, as other property tax bill or property taxes are. So the first installment is due in December 10th, and the second installment is due on April 10th. So it's $603 per year is the current assessment for single family home.
Okay, and then there's a different assessment for the apartment complex.
That's exactly it, Ryder. The apartment complex pays on a per unit basis, and it's about a third of the assessment of a single family home per unit. So I think it's $180 or so per unit, and I want to say that apartment complex has about 130 units or so. So
okay. And then there was a following question that was asked, which is how much of the Victoria by the Bay taxes do you use outside of the community? I'm assuming by this reference, the person asked the question is referring to the LAD taxes or the LAD assessment, in that, unless there's some other Victoria by the Bay tax I'm unaware of.
I believe that's the
okay.
question there, Ryder, and it goes back to the question that Mike answered a little earlier. All LAD assessment revenues stay within the LAD district, with the exception of the major roads, as he described a little earlier.
Okay. Back to another question about explaining the maintenance increase fees over the years. So they're adjusted on the consumer price index, or CPI, basis. And so, for example, what was the last assessment? In other words, when we went from the last assessment to the current rate, which I think you said was roughly $603 per single family residential unit, what's that percentage increase over the prior year?
That percentage increase from last year was, I believe, 5.3%. So the last couple years, the CPI has been a little higher, as everybody knows. Inflation has been through the roof. I'll say historically, over the course of the last 10 to 20 years, the CPI has averaged about 3% or so, and so that 3%, as compared to, for example, some utility increases that are in the 8 to 9 to 10 range, is what's causing this delta, and it accumulates, right? It compounds. So yes, 5.3 from last year, Ryder.
So, and I guess just under current assessment structure, a CPI adjustment on a $603 assessment now is going to be about $5 per $100, or it's going to be about $30 is how much it should go up year over year for this coming period, roughly speaking.
So
if it was another 5% increase in a year from now.
Yeah.
without any sort of adjustment on rates, right?
Right. It's the $30 for the year.
Yeah.
$30.
Okay. All right. Next question here is, Carol asked a question. Why don't we collaborate with East Bay Mud to create a drought tolerant community that would reduce costs and be more sustainable? And then there were some other comments that, which certainly we've seen these programs in other agencies too, where East Bay Mud offers turf replacement programs and other incentives to be more drought tolerant. I guess, have we looked at some of that stuff? Is the consultant for the efficiency analysis looking at that kind of stuff? Mike, maybe you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thank you, Carol, for the question. So the consultant is looking at this kind of thing. We are working with their conservation division on water consumption currently. We have done some sort of back of map book calculations to convert, a mow strip, planter strip in front of someone's house is going to run about $1,500. There's 800 homes out there. So back of matchbook is about $1.2 million minus whatever rebates we may get. So sort of the brutal truth of it is that is something we can do in the future moving forward, but immediately in front of us is the need to address this deficit and to cure it. So something like that won't do that for us, but it can be something that we look to in the future to gain efficiencies.
And so that kind of the parallel there is what you already did proactively with the LED conversion, where the LED conversion resulted in, it was an investment process and then working with PG&E to ultimately finance some of that, but it yielded energy cost savings and maintenance cost savings, at least on the lights itself, even if not the solar cells. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah. And what was unique was for the LED conversions, there are loans available for that through PG&E. However, I'm not aware that that's the case for doing landscaping conversions. So it's really the upfront capital cost to make the conversion that is the hurdle.
Okay. Dante, a question for you. Again, this is the kind of question that goes straight to the top of the organization. Do the assessments pay for the staff payroll or just direct costs of contracts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it does pay for 100% of the contracts. So the revenue that's generated pays for the contracts. It has to be supplemented by staff too, because you have to have someone managing the contracts. There is work that we need to do to supplement the assistance that we contract out for. That is something we've asked the third-party consultant to analyze and provide us with some information on October 3rd. In my view, and just kind of looking at it from my perspective, even if you took out all of the staff time that's associated with lighting and landscaping district for Victoria by the Bay, it would not be enough money to cure the deficit. So there's still a problem. So it covers 100% of the contracts, and we do need to supplement it with staff because somebody needs to follow through and make sure that the contractor's doing what they need to do.
I guess in some ways, if you weren't covering some of those costs for staff operations, you'd be back to the situation you are now, where other general fund money would be subsidizing the operations of the lighting and landscape district.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Ben, a question for you. So when should property owners expect the voting paperwork? I think fundamental to this question is an assumption that there is voting paperwork that's coming their way, but that's to be determined, right?
Yes, it's to be determined, but they do get the voting paperwork, which in effect is the notice that I mentioned that will tell them when the council meeting is, and will include the ballot and instructions on how to return the ballot. And that has to be sent out at least 45 days before the council meeting. So again, I can't give it a specific date because we don't yet know, I believe, when exactly we're going to have the council meeting. But the good thing about these procedures is there is a lot of notice that has to be provided, and it'll be in writing and to each property owner.
So it's my sense is, and maybe Dante, you'll have this, is there is a workshop happening in early October, and there will be some direction from city council to staff on kind of where to move forward, and you'll have a better, clearer crystal ball than of schedule.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Next question is Carol's asking, what about recycled water? Why aren't we using recycled water to save money? Mike, you got your all things infrastructure. We got some recycled water out there, some purple pipe.
Great idea. We'd love to do it. The issue is you need to convert your source to recycled water, which we don't have at this point in time. It's something that's being looked at by Pinole, who operates the wastewater treatment plant, the Pinole Hercules wastewater treatment plant. There's also the potential out in Rodeo that one of the refineries may be converting operations and may have recycled water as well. The trick would be to get the recycled water to Victoria by the Bay. So it would have to be piped. That would probably take something like 2 to 3 miles of piping. And obviously the infrastructure costs for that would be very high, but it's certainly something we're always going to be looking at and towards in the future.
At the risk of taking Carol and her fellow listeners down a deep hole here, just to clarify, at this point in time, there is no recycled water available or being used to irrigate in Hercules. Is that true across the whole city?
True. No recycled water being produced, and then no piping in place. So you'd have a plant, conversion that would need to take place, and then you'd need to pipe it to, in this case, Victoria.
And in almost all cases, recycled water is coming from a wastewater treatment facility. And it sounds like that you're in your city, that wastewater treatment facility is operated by Pinole.
Yeah, it's jointly owned by Pinole and Hercules. It's operated by Pinole. It's located at the bottom of Tennant Avenue in Pinole. So the piping would have to go from there to the site.
So it's fundamentally it's an excellent idea, and obviously recycled water can save you money. you could essentially be the water provider yourself, but the amount of infrastructure, we're just not even close to having that infrastructure yet to be in a position to do that.
Yes, but definitely something we'll look forward into in the future.
All right. Here's a question involving the HOA, Mike. I think I'll do a follow-up one with you on this. Have you reached out to the homeowners association to see what they are doing to maintain efficiencies while they maintain most of Victoria by the Bay and try to control costs?
Yeah, we've reached out to both HOAs. We're working to get on a board meeting they have. Additionally, they've distributed, the workshop here tonight to their membership. And so we're anticipating we'll have more conversations in the future, moving forward. In the past, conversations I've had with them, they have similar struggles trying to contain cost. So it doesn't appear that there's, any sort of magic wand we can wave to make this stuff go away.
And I suspect if they had at least half of a magic wand to give you a suggestion on, you'd be more than happy to hear that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. And then a different question here that is asked is, can you clarify if the parks in the city are funded through a separate budget? I'd actually like Dante, maybe you'd be interested in answering that question. Who pays for parks in the city? And I guess let's be clear about private park versus public park. So for example, I'm looking at this map right now. Victoria Park is, the maintenance on that is being funded by the neighborhood, correct? By the assessment district?
Right. We have some community parks and neighborhood parks, and Mike has a lot of the detail on that. Mike, why don't you expound on who pays for what?
Sure. So most parks are located in our citywide park program. That's actually a separate assessment on people's tax roll. There's about a dozen parks in the citywide parks, and those benefit residents of the entire city. So generally they're frequented by people from throughout the city, and they have amenities that attract, people from throughout the city. Whereas the neighborhood parks generally are there just for the neighborhood. So for example, if you look at Victoria Park and Arbor Park, those are neighborhood parks. Those would be the kinds of parks that would be enjoyed by Victoria by the Bay residents. But say you look at Refugio Valley Park, there you have a lake a walking trail, a big grassy area to play in, all those kinds of things. Also, Shoreline Park is a citywide park. That's similar in that you have a play area, you have restrooms, you have a swing set, you have barbecue pits and a large grassy area too. So the idea is, people could come along the Bay Trail or they could drive to it. So certainly the vicinity of the district is well represented by citywide parks that are paid through everyone's assessments.
Thank you, Mike. Can you clarify what the Victoria by the Bay assessment pays versus the landscape lighting assessment district versus Parks and Rec? So, Mike, I guess I'll go back to you, and I may need you to clarify. I'm guessing VBTV assessment is referring to the HOA versus the LAD versus Parks and Rec, which I think you were just explaining is primarily funded by the general fund, correct?
Yeah, so Parks and Recs, they don't maintain these parks, though they occasionally do, rent out tables and events at them, and there are events at them like movie night. So it's completely separate budget. The maintenance of and operations of the parks is purely through lighting and landscaping assessment districts, whereas the parks themselves are paid through the general fund. So the Parks and Rec group.
And
that answer your question, or?
I think so. So let me ask a follow-up too, because we have this map up here, and I just want to make sure we're clear for this question that was asked. When they say Victoria by the Bay assessment, again, I'm assuming they're talking about their HOA assessment. So on this map, do we identify some of the HOA covered areas, or is it just everything that's not in green or brown is covered by the HOA?
That's correct, or the property owners. There's small areas of open space which aren't shown on the map, but for all intents and purposes, everything that is not colored white here is not maintained by the assessment district.
Okay. And then you had referred to some slope areas that were covered by the HOA as well. So I'm assuming those are more on the edges of this development.
Yeah. So typically, you'll have a lot that backs up to a hill slope, and then the slope goes down to the street. And so they have a fence at the back of their lot, and then that space between the street and the fence is managed by the HOA. Maintained and managed by the HOA.
If
All right.
Ryder, if I might.
Yes, please.
I myself, once this map was brought back up, wanted to clarify. I misspoke a little bit earlier when I pointed the residents to this map, because this map was created for this presentation tonight. We use other maps to administer the lighting landscaping contracts that do have the homeowners association areas segregated out on them. And I was just in my head thinking of those maps versus this map. So this particular map actually doesn't really show the HOA areas clearly, other than they're not highlighted at all.
No problem, Jeff. You know what I'm confident we can do is we can get a hold of a map that you probably already have somewhere pretty easily, and we can make that available through our victoriallad.org website, and that way people can draw that distinction. So that's an asset we can take away from this, since there's been several questions about the relative roles of the organizations involved. Yeah, I want to acknowledge we have about 10 minutes left and more than 10 minutes worth of questions, so we may not quite get to all questions tonight, but we're going to do our best. Maybe try to answer these in quick fashion. Mike, question for you. Has there been a bid for the new maintenance contract? When was the last time we bid for the work that's currently done by our friends on the call here?
So interesting backstory there. So we did bid it out previously. We had a contractor come in who was unfamiliar with the site. They underbid it. They weren't successful, and they had to basically withdraw from doing the work. We then bid it out, at which time Pacific Site got the contract. They had gotten the contract previously before that period, but it's been 6 years. So one of the things we're looking at doing is rebidding it out here in the near future. But with that, I'd like to add that we have kept the cost down. In fact, we've kept the cost to the original bid amount. And this was our effort to try to keep the districts in the green and keep costs down. But it's become clear that, it's no longer going to be possible to do that.
Fair enough. Next question, how many trees do you cut down last year and how do you determine that and how much does it cost annually? Jeff, do you have a thought on that?
It's kind of a two-piece question. We had a couple of projects within Victoria by the Bay last year where we had to remove some trees that were causing a lot of issues. So there's that one piece. And I apologize, I don't have those exact numbers in front of me. Mike may. And then we also have where we have trees that fall, that come down because of storm issues or things of that nature. And, we usually I'd say we probably lose 4 or 5 trees a year in Victoria by the Bay to, storm issues or other natural issues, we'll say. And those trees are usually removed and then they are most times replaced. Mike, we speak about the project trees, those of course aren't necessarily replaced or replaced per tree, I guess you would say, because they're removed for specific reasons. As Mike stated earlier, the pruning in Victoria by the Bay is averaging around about 25,000 a year. And then there's also money set aside for issues that come up over the course of the year. We had a decent branch come down. I'll bring it up this way. We had a decent sized branch come down just last evening that was cleaned up today by our landscaping contractors. And so a tree that may shed a branch may have to be evaluated after it sheds the branch to see if it's basically made that tree unsafe. But through damage, we may end up needing to remove that tree. And before we do any major tree removals or anything of that nature, we bring in licensed arborists to do all the evaluations. So it's not just us going out there saying these trees need to go. We bring in licensed arborists and it's all done that way.
So I don't get a nickname you Paul Bunyan, Jeff?
No.
Okay.
Ryder, real quick here. So we do everything we can to preserve trees.
Yeah.
If they're destructive, like pushing up sidewalks, people's fences, retaining walls, and heading towards their house foundation, we have to trim the roots, or if it's too severe, we have to take the tree out because it's going to damage people's private property. And then if it's unsafe, we take them out. So Jeff's on point here, but I want to sort of provide the statement here that we do everything we can to preserve the trees.
Okay. All right. Carol is asking a question. Are the lights in the district dark sky lights? I'm assuming that means there's some strategy behind dimming them or turning them off at a certain time of night so that you can see the stars potentially, assuming there's a fog bank or a cloud cover.
So Ryder, there's actually there's street lights that you can invest in that supposedly don't project light upwards. These predate those that are 15 years old. What people sometimes do is they put in shields on top to keep the light from being directed upwards. So these are not dark sky lights.
Okay. Another follow-up question on this I think the question that is asked is the city only looking at the 5% CPI increase? I'm assuming that the nature of this question, and maybe it can be re-asked again with more clarity, is when you're looking at the current assessment and the trend on assessment, are you only relying on the CPI adjustment, which fundamentally I guess would make sense to me, given that that's the only thing that's in the books right now to assess with, right? But is that the assumption you're going with?
Ryder, would you like me to take a shot at that?
Yeah, sorry, Mike. I should have. You or Ed.
So the current CPI allotments are not enough to cover the deficit we currently have. So we're still waiting for the outcome and findings of the independent third-party study. But barring that, in order to make the district whole, the rates would have to go up significantly. We have not yet calculated that. as far as how much it would be. Again, it's dependent upon the study.
Okay. Another question that gets in pretty deep into the weeds, which I realize is almost a pun given the nature of the work that we're doing here. But Jeff, or probably Mike, is it possible that the irrigation equipment could be funded for water conservation that would actually be covered by the infrastructure funding bill? So the IRA bill that was this juggernaut of money that was rained down upon states and cities? That's maybe a Dante or Mike question, what the scope is of the IRA.
So we have 35 controllers out in Victoria by the Bay. They run about $10,000 to go to web-based controllers. So you're talking about $350,000. And we would be very interested in getting grants if we can, and it's something we'll be looking into.
Okay. All right. I think we're going to run out of time here. Actually, just look at the clock here. So there were several, I will just note there were several questions that were kind of questions/comments about specific maintenance issues. So I'm going to punt those to an email request for folks, just to give you a chance to make sure you communicate directly with those that are in charge of those things. Mia, would you please go to the second last slide in our deck so I could shift us to some comments from our city manager and then wrap it up myself. So first, I want to thank the public for the excellent questions that were asked tonight. We did our best to answer as many as we could, and we'll try to follow up on the other ones as we get along here. And also for those that are asking questions about specific maintenance issues like irrigation questions or swapping out trees or pruning questions, I would want to give you some email addresses in a second to follow up on those. Dante, our city manager, what are kind of the next steps for this process that the public should be aware of?
So I wanted to, again, thank the public and people for tuning in today. The next step in the process is the October 3rd meeting, when we'll have the report back from our consultant about any efficiencies. Are there other things that we need to take a look at to help reduce costs to make it a little bit more sustainable for our districts? Also, there have been a number of questions that have been asked in the past about strategies for funding lighting and landscaping districts. We'll talk a little bit about that. I would encourage everyone to stay engaged. These questions and suggestions that came up tonight are incredibly helpful to us. And so I'm just happy that everyone tuned in, and please stay engaged with us.
Okay. So let's go to the next slide, Mia, our last slide here, which is to your point, Dante. So a couple things. First of all, one of the great things about local government and my joy of getting to work in local government is the people who can actually make an impact on your day-to-day life are responsive, and they actually, you can actually see them, they're real people. They are not stuck thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. or hundreds of miles away in Sacramento. So if you have questions about landscaping, street lighting, or park maintenance, you're encouraged to talk to Mike, our public works director tonight. You have his phone number and his email address right there on the screen. So I would encourage you to reach out to him, particularly with some of the questions that were asked around maintenance questions or other issues in that area. He would be the ideal guy. He may not have the direct answer. He may push it on to Jeff or JR or Roman, but he'll definitely direct that question. If you have questions about assessments themselves, the voting process, what that might look like, that's going to go to our expert Ed, who you heard from a bunch tonight. He's the king of LADs across California, with probably 100 such districts that he's in charge of maintaining and managing. He's agreed to make himself available to answer any questions from the public, so you can reach out to him with questions related to assessments, voting procedures, and process. Or you can give him a call at what I assume is his office number there at the 3400 number, right, Ed? And then in general, to Dante's point, we very much want you to be involved and understand there's a lot of math and engineering and complex issues involved here, and an assessment and voting process. We don't expect that you're an expert on the 218 process, but we expect of ourselves that we're going to work diligently to keep you informed about this process and what's going on, the policy options that'll be available for you as residents and for the city council to set direction on. To that end, this website, victoriallad.org, is kind of our center post where we're bringing everything together. This video will be posted on there. Follow-up frequently asked questions will be posted on there. Supplemental maps, like if we get Jeff's map here on the HOA areas relative to the assessment district areas, we'll make that content available there too. So our goal is to provide you with as much information to be as transparent as possible to get you that information. And finally, should you have additional follow-up questions which you want to inquire about, we'd encourage you to just give us a call down at City Hall at 510-799-8200. I think I covered it unless I am missing anything. Dante, is that did I run the gamut there? Mike, are we good?
I think we are.
Okay. Well, again, thank you to the public for your participation tonight. My thanks to all of our panel of experts for giving their time this evening to answer your wonderful questions this evening. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you participate in our workshop in early October and staying connected with us on our victoriallad.org website. Have a good night, Hercules.